The light in the attic sometimes. What seems like an accident is really something else trying to get in. It was a small house in the middle of nowhere, but it was all I could afford. A fixer-upper, as the real estate agent called it. But honestly, I didn't care much. I was just happy to finally be out on my own. After years of living with my parents, I needed a change. I wanted space, freedom, and most importantly, peace. The house was cheap because of its condition. It had been empty for years, so the roof leaked in places, the plumbing was iffy, and the floors creaked under every step, but it had potential. The walls had that old, comforting scent of wood, and there was a small attic I could turn into a studio. I figured I could fix it up over time. That first week, I worked hard, scraped the paint, patched up the leaks, and moved in the essentials. But I noticed something strange. Every night, around 2 a.m., the attic light would flicker on. I thought it was just faulty wiring at first. I didn't pay much attention to it until one night, when I couldn't sleep and decided to check it out. The stairs creaked loudly as I climbed up to the attic door. The light was on, but there was no reason for it to be. I hadn't been up there all day, and I certainly didn't leave the light on. I reached for the doorknob, but hesitated. Something didn't feel right. I opened the door slowly, and when I looked inside, I saw the light hanging from the ceiling, casting a dim glow over the dusty floorboards. It was still flickering, but no one was up there. The room was empty. It looked like it always had, full of old furniture and boxes, stacked and covered with old sheets. But there was something else now, something I hadn't noticed before. In the corner of the room, near the far window, was a large, dark stain on the floor. It was too big to be a shadow and too old to be anything natural. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. The air smelled stale, like something had been sealed up in this room for years. I leaned down to get a better look at the stain, and then I heard something. A scraping sound, like metal on wood. It came from somewhere behind me, in the shadows near the corner. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. I stepped back and bumped into something. I turned around, expecting to find one of the old boxes, but instead, my breath caught in my throat. There was a figure standing in the doorway, just outside the attic. A tall, thin figure, cloaked in shadow, but I could make out the outline of a face. A face that looked wrong, hollow, almost like a mask, but too real. I stumbled backward, heart racing, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. I slammed the attic door shut and locked it, my hands trembling. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, too scared to go back to bed. The next morning, I didn't feel much better, but I had to get on with my day. I convinced myself it was a trick of the light, maybe a bad dream. I spent the day fixing up more of the house, avoiding the attic. That night, the light came on again. I stayed downstairs this time, determined not to go up there, but it was hard to ignore. The light flickered on and off, casting strange, distorted shadows under the door. I couldn't stop looking at it, could hardly keep my eyes away. I finally gave in. I grabbed a flashlight, took a deep breath, and slowly made my way upstairs. The door was slightly ajar, the light still flickering. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob again, and then I heard it. A soft voice, almost like a whisper, coming from inside the attic. "Come closer." I froze. The voice sounded like it was right behind me, but when I spun around, the hallway was empty. There was no one there. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering in my chest. Something was very wrong. I turned to leave, but just as I did, I heard a loud thump behind me, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. I whipped around, but the attic door had slammed shut, the light still flickering on the other side. I ran down the stairs, out of the house, and didn't stop until I reached the neighbor's house. I banged on their door, my hands shaking. The neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Lawson, let me in. She looked at me, confused, but I was too shaken to explain everything right away. After a few minutes, I managed to tell her what had happened. Mrs. Lawson went quiet for a long moment. Then she said something I wasn't prepared for. "You're not the first one to see him." I stared at her, not understanding. She explained that the house had been vacant for years because the last tenants had left suddenly, without any warning. They'd moved out late one night, leaving behind all their things. Mrs. Lawson had never gotten the full story, but there were rumors about the house being haunted. The previous owners had been an elderly couple who'd lived there for decades, but Mrs. Lawson said the husband had died mysteriously, and his wife disappeared a few weeks later. People said they had heard strange noises from the attic before they left. "You should leave the house," she said softly. "There's something in the attic. It's been there a long time, and it doesn't like being disturbed." I didn't stay that night. In fact, I didn't go back to the house for weeks. I stayed with Mrs. Lawson until I could figure out what to do. But every time I tried to go near the house, I'd hear that scraping sound again. It was always faint, but it was always there. Scraping from the attic. When I finally went back to the house, I was determined to get answers. I went up into the attic once more, but this time, I wasn't going to let fear control me. I pushed the door open, and there, in the middle of the floor, was a new stain. This one was dark and fresh, and it was spreading. Something was crawling beneath the floorboards, and now I could hear the whisper clearly. "Come closer. Some things are meant to stay hidden. If you feel the urge to investigate, remember, some things crawl out when you open the door." The girl who watches from the mirror sometimes, the reflection doesn't just reflect you. It watches. I've always been a little paranoid. As a kid, I was terrified of mirrors. I wasn't afraid of what they showed me, but of what they didn't. You know that feeling when you look at yourself and something feels off, like you're not alone in the room, even though you are. I never talked about it, not to anyone, not even my parents. It just felt like a weird phase, the childhood fear that would pass. But it didn't. It started when I was around 15. That's when I first noticed her. I was getting ready for school, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my hair. It was early in the morning, and I had that heavy feeling, the kind of tiredness that comes from not sleeping well for days. I looked at my reflection, and then I saw her. She was standing behind me. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. You know how sometimes the lighting can make a shadow look like something else. But this wasn't a shadow. It was a figure. A girl. About my height, maybe a little shorter, with long dark hair and a pale face. She was wearing a white dress, but it was all wrong. The fabric looked old, torn in places, with the edges frayed like it had been through years of wear. I spun around, heart racing, but the bathroom was empty. I looked back into the mirror. She was still there, just standing, not moving. Her eyes were wide, staring at me, like she was waiting for something. I froze, unable to tear my eyes away from the reflection. It was like she was watching me, but not in a way that made sense. I wasn't afraid at first. It was more like I felt watched, like I had no privacy, no space where I could just exist without being observed. I blinked, and she was gone. Just like that. I thought I had imagined it. A trick of the light. I told myself to shake it off. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. It wasn't the last time I saw her. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice that every time I looked in the mirror, she was there. At first, it was just standing in the background, a faint reflection in the corner. But over time, she grew more and more distinct. Her hair became less tangled, her dress started to look more detailed, and eventually, she started to move. Slowly, cautiously. At night, when I'd glance in the mirror before bed, I could see her standing just behind me, her face peering over my shoulder. I could almost hear her breathing. Sometimes, I could hear her whispering, but it was never clear enough for me to understand the words. I started avoiding mirrors altogether. I kept the bathroom door closed when I wasn't in it. I stopped looking at my reflection when I brushed my teeth or washed my face. But no matter how hard I tried to avoid her, she always found her way back. Then came the night it happened. The night I realized just how far things had gone. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard something. A tapping. Soft at first, like the sound of a nail gently tapping against glass. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the sound grew louder and more persistent. I got up, grabbed my phone for light, and stumbled into the bathroom. My breath caught in my throat when I saw her. She was standing directly in front of the mirror. Her hand was pressed against it, as if she were trying to reach through. Her eyes, they weren't wide anymore. They were narrow, almost as if she were angry. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. I couldn't move. It felt like I was frozen, trapped in the same moment, unable to look away from her reflection. She leaned closer to the glass, and for the first time, her lips moved. I couldn't hear her voice, but I could see the shape of the words she was saying. "Come to me." I tried to back away, but I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't work. It was like I was rooted to the spot. The girl reached her other hand up to the mirror, and I saw her fingertips press against the surface. And then it happened. Her reflection started to shift, bending unnaturally as if she were trying to pull herself through. Her fingers left marks in the glass, dark smudges that didn't fade. The reflection seemed to stretch, distorting her form into something more monstrous. Her features became sharper, more angular, and her eyes, they followed me. No matter where I moved, no matter how I tried to escape, those eyes stayed locked on mine. Suddenly, I snapped out of my paralysis, stumbling backward, hitting the floor hard. The girl's hand came through the glass. I screamed. The reflection vanished instantly, and the tapping stopped. I was alone in the bathroom, heart pounding in my chest. But I knew something had changed. For the first time, I was terrified. The next day, I took a hammer to the bathroom mirror. I shattered it into 1,000 pieces, watching the shards scatter across the floor, each piece reflecting the room in fractured, jagged angles. But I couldn't escape the feeling. I couldn't shake the thought that she was still there, watching. Even now, whenever I catch a glimpse of a mirror, I can't help but wonder if she's behind me, waiting. The thing is, she doesn't just come through the glass. Sometimes, she whispers my name, softly. "Come to me." I've learned not to answer. Not anymore. But I'm still waiting for the day she comes back. And I'm afraid. That day is soon. Don't look too closely at the reflection. You never know who or what is watching. And remember, mirrors don't just reflect what's in front of them. They can show things you don't want to see. Voicemail from the woods: if you ever get a call with no number and you're near the forest, don't answer it. Just don't. This happened in 2022, just after my girlfriend Emma and I moved to a small rental house on the edge of the Chattahoochee National Forest in Georgia. We both worked remotely, and the rent was dirt cheap for what we were getting: a full acre of land, no neighbors for at least half a mile, and a decent house that just needed a little fixing up. I loved it out there. Peaceful. No sirens, no traffic, just wind in the trees and the occasional deer. But that quiet, it gets weird sometimes. Like, so quiet it feels like the world's holding its breath. The first weird thing happened maybe 3 weeks after we moved in. Emma was in a Zoom meeting, and I was out back stacking firewood. I left my phone on the porch, and when I came back, I saw a missed call. No number, no contact info. Just unknown. And there was a voicemail. I hit play. There was silence at first, long, stretched out silence. I almost thought it was blank. Then, a sound, faint, like wind, or static. Then I heard it. A voice. Quiet. Raspy. "You shouldn't be here." That's it. Just that. I played it again, trying to hear if maybe it was someone pranking me. Could have been an audio filter or whatever. But the voice didn't sound fake. It sounded tired and scared. I showed it to Emma. She thought it was creepy but shrugged it off. "Spam call," she said. "We're out in the middle of nowhere. Probably scammers spoofing a number." Maybe. A few days later, I got another one. Same thing. Unknown. Another voicemail. This one was worse. It started with breathing, like someone trying not to panic. Then, muffled sounds, footsteps, rustling. Then the voice again. "He comes at night. Don't let him in." I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I went to check the edge of our property where it met the forest, just to make sure there weren't any weird footprints or signs of trespassing. And that's when I found it. A shirt. Torn. Dirty. Caught on a low branch like someone had been running through the trees. It wasn't new. It looked like it had been out there a while. Still, I called the sheriff's department and filed a report. They sent out a deputy, real casual about it, like it was probably just a hiker or some drunk who got lost. He didn't even write anything down. That same night, I got another voicemail. But this time, it wasn't just the voice. It was a scream, blood-curdling, cut off midway like the person had been dragged away mid-breath. I dropped my phone. I wanted to go stay at a motel, but Emma insisted we were overreacting. Said I'd been listening to too many scary podcasts. Maybe she was right. Maybe. Until 2 nights later. I woke up around 2 a.m. and realized Emma wasn't in bed. I figured she'd gone to the bathroom, but after 10 minutes passed, I got up to check. She wasn't in the house. The front door was wide open. I ran outside, barefoot, calling her name. The woods were pitch black. I didn't even grab a flashlight. Then I heard it. Her voice. Faint. From the trees. Babe. Help. I ran toward the sound. It was so dark, I could barely see, but I didn't care. I just kept going. I followed her voice deeper and deeper into the forest, until I couldn't even see the house behind me anymore. And then the voice changed. Same words. Different tone. Mocking. Babe. Help. It wasn't her. I stopped cold. My blood turned to ice. Then something stepped out from behind a tree about 20 feet ahead of me. It wasn't human. It stood tall, thin like a scarecrow, with 2 long arms and no face, just a black oval where the features should have been. It tilted its head, and then, from my back pocket, my phone started ringing. No number, just a known caller. I didn't answer. I ran. Branches tore at my skin. One tripped more than once, but I didn't stop. I made it back to the house, slammed the door, locked it, and called 911. They searched the woods for hours. Found nothing. Emma showed up around 7 a.m., barefoot and shaking, just outside the front door. She had no idea how she got there. Said she'd been asleep in bed all night, had no memory of leaving. The sheriff told us we were probably dealing with sleepwalking and stress. We moved 2 days later. I changed my number, smashed the old phone, got therapy, the works. But here's the thing. Last week, I got a new voicemail. Different phone. New number. Still said unknown. It played a recording of me. Running. Screaming. And then that same awful voice. You shouldn't have come back. Some things don't need doors to get in. They use signal. If you ever get a call from the woods, don't answer. Ever. The cabin that shouldn't be there, some places aren't forgotten. They're hidden. Buried for a reason. This happened to me 3 years ago, but I still have dreams about it. Not nightmares exactly. Just reminders. I was 20 at the time, freshly dropped out of college, and living back home in rural Oregon. Not far from Eugene, but far enough to feel like we were in the middle of nowhere. There isn't much to do around here, especially when your friends are all working or moved out. My cousin Aaron was the only one left I still hung out with regularly. We grew up like brothers. When he texted me that weekend about a hiking trip up in the Cascades, I said yes without even asking for details. He said he'd found a trail on some old logging maps, something not on Google or AllTrails. That alone should have made me pause, but I trusted Aaron. He was always into survivalist stuff, knew how to read maps, start fires with nothing, all that. We packed our gear and left early Saturday morning. The drive took about 2.5 hours. The last part was rough, gravel roads, no signs, no reception. Classic don't get murdered here kind of vibes. But the forest was beautiful. Mist between the trees, moss hanging like curtains. Peaceful, in its own way. We parked where the dirt path basically disappeared into brush. Aaron pulled out a printed map, traced it with his finger, and said, if the markers are right, the trail should run east for a mile, then curve north. There's an old ranger's cabin at the end. Cabin? I asked. Like, open? He shrugged. Supposed to be abandoned. Built in the 40s. I figured we could camp nearby. We hiked for hours. It wasn't flat terrain either. Lots of switchbacks, fallen trees, steep climbs. The deeper we got, the more I noticed something odd. No birds. No insects. Just the sound of our boots and the occasional snap of a branch underfoot. Every once in a while, I'd get that weird feeling, like someone was watching us. I figured it was just isolation messing with my head. Eventually, we found it. The cabin. Except, it didn't look like something from the 1940s. It looked older. Weathered gray logs, a slanted roof half covered in moss, and a door that hung crooked on rusted hinges. There were no windows, but the walls had narrow slits like ventilation holes. Or something else. Aaron was thrilled. "Dude, this is it." He grinned. "We actually found it." I didn't share his excitement. Something felt wrong. The air was heavy, stale. It smelled like old wood and whetstone, but also something metallic. Blood, maybe? I couldn't tell. Aaron tried the door. It creaked open with a deep groan. He stepped inside without hesitation. "Wait," I said. "Let's just set up camp and check it out in the morning." He waved me off. "It's just a shack, man. Probably empty." I stood at the threshold for a second, heart pounding for no reason I could explain. Then I stepped in. Inside was pitch black. Aaron clicked on his flashlight, revealing a single room. Dirt floor, broken shelves, a table that looked hand-carved, and in the far corner, a trapdoor. I thought it was a shadow at first, but when we got closer, it was clearly a wooden hatch built into the ground. It had no handle, just a groove where someone had pried it open before. Aaron looked at me and smiled like a kid on Christmas. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "Nope," I said. "Absolutely not." But he was already kneeling down, trying to lift it. To our surprise, it opened easily. Too easily, like it had just been used. The smell that came out was worse than anything I've ever experienced. Rotten, chemical, and something else I still can't name. It hit me so hard I gagged. "There's a ladder," Aaron said, shining his light down. "Goes deep." I backed away. "We're not going down there." He looked up, serious now. "Just a quick look, then we leave." I swear, before I could argue, he was already climbing down. I waited. 30 seconds. A minute. I called his name. Nothing. Finally, I knelt down and yelled, "Aaron." From below, I heard something that still chills me. Not his voice, but a whisper, right next to my ear, even though no one was behind me. "Come down. He wants to meet you." I froze. I didn't even scream. I just slammed the trapdoor shut, grabbed my pack, and ran. I didn't stop. Not when I hit the trail. Not when my lungs burned. Not even when I tripped and cracked my knee on a rock. I ran until I saw the car. I drove like a maniac back to town, barely able to see through tears. I told the police everything. They sent a search team, but there was nothing. No trail, no cabin, no sign anyone had been there. Aaron was never found. A few weeks later, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. Aaron, standing in the doorway of that cabin, smiling. Behind him, just visible in the shadows, was a tall, thin shape with no face. I don't go hiking anymore. I don't answer unmarked mail. And I never, ever follow trails that aren't on the map.